Anyway, we're going to talk a little bit about sort of my point of view, at least stateside here anyway. And even though it's going to be based on what's happening here in the States, I think there's a lot of cross-feed, a lot of things that apply. I've flown with pilots from around the world, and so really I think the issues that you'll be touching on, I'll be touching on, seem to be universal, some systemic issues that we have with primary flight training in the general aviation realm. First of all, I'd like to thank certainly Paul and David and Darren for putting this together. I think whatever comes from your meeting today might lay the groundwork, be a model for maybe other countries to do something similar. And I have to say I'm a little dismayed that we haven't done something like this yet here in the States. Okay, Darren, let's go to the next slide, if you would.
Dad,
Yeah.
how do you spell burrito?
There we go.
B-U-R-I-T-T-O.
All right. So I was tasked with trying to address three questions here. Why is UPRT important? And I think any of us in the room can answer that. How can UPRT be incorporated into current training? I think we all probably have ideas on that. And should UPRT be mandated? So I'm going to run through each of these. Darren, next slide, please. So we'll start with why UPRT is important, and it dovetails certainly with what Paul was showing on screen there. Darren will go to the next slide. It doesn't really matter which decade, how we want to parse the information, but pilot error is usually listed as a cause or a factor in anywhere between 70 to 90% of general aviation accidents. And so it always comes back on the pilot one way or the other. And so what can we do to help the pilots out so that we can maybe reduce that number? Let's go to the next slide, if you would. And so one of the things we look at, and this has been a popular graphic in FAA documents for several decades now anyway, but it breaks down the percentage of general aviation accidents by phase of flight. Those are the red bars that you're seeing, but at the same time, in very light blue, you see the approximate flight times that an average general aviation pilot will spend in those particular phases over the course of their light airplane flying career. And of course, there's nothing surprising here in terms of what I'll call the big four phases where most of our accidents are occurring. Takeoff and initial climb, certainly maneuvering flight, approach, and landing. And what we find is that 17% of our flight time is spent in these phases, yet these phases represent 70% of the accidents in general aviation. So that's certainly disproportionate. And even so, these phases, I think we can see what the commonality is, right? Typically operating at maybe lower energy states, certainly takeoff, approach, and landing at lower altitudes. We have opportunities for multiple distractions, flying at higher angle of attack, smaller margin to the stall, and doing multiple configuration changes, other traffic in and around the pattern as well. So there's just lots of opportunities for us to make mistakes or to at least get distracted from our primary job, which is to fly the airplane. And so what do we do to try to make this a little bit more proportional and get rid of some of this disproportionality? And a lot of times when pilots ask me, typically, money is always a concern, of course, and people have a limited amount of money that they can spend on their flying budget each year. And often the question is, well, what can I do to maximize my flying with my limited flying budget? And I always say practice takeoffs and landings. I mean, all of our flying skills and awareness skills come into play during just one hop around the traffic pattern. Darren, let's go to the next one. And so again, just a different way of looking at it. This is human error in general aviation accidents. December 2005, a study. It was done over a 10-year period that boiled it down to more than 14,000 light airplane accidents. And they found that there was at least one skill-based error committed in these accidents 80% of the time. And in fact, in 50% of the accidents, the skill-based error was the first human-caused error in the chain of events. Decision errors were present in about a third of the accidents. And so even though current training paradigm is really focused on scenario-based training, I think the faulty assumption that we make is that people are ready, pilots are ready to do scenario-based training because they've got the skill-based part of it, the maneuvers-based part of it wired. And the reality is we don't. And so we have to have our stick and rudder skills in shape so that we have all of the mental channels open to us to make good decisions. And so I think if we kind of focus on the skill-based errors, we might be able to do some other things to even reduce the decision error side of the equation. Let's go to the next slide. And so at least here in the States, if we look at the top skill-based errors, again, no surprise to anybody in the audience who's been doing this for a long time, loss of control, both ground and in flight, improper maintenance, improper airspeed control, stall spin, certainly, and not compensating for the wind. And so even something as basic as dealing with the wind, which we probably have to do on most every flight, pilots need a little bit more emphasis in that area as well. Let's go to the next slide, please. So again, this is just another way of looking at the information. And once we get this up, this will be the fatal accidents from the General Aviation Joint Steering Committee. Again, a 10-year period in the States. Darren, let's go ahead and change the slide if we can.
Lost the link.
Darren, are you there? So maybe I'm just not seeing it on screen. Are you seeing the accident bars in red and yellow on the screen?
Yes, we've got that.
Okay.
Here.
All right. So this shows the top 6 fatal accident categories, and we can see the red bar, loss of control in flight, far and away the number one cause of fatal accidents over the 10-year period. Controlled flight into terrain is number 2, and even at number 2, it's 1/3 the frequency of loss of control in flight. And in fact, we could stack those next 5 categories on top of each other. Controlled flight into terrain, power plant failures, low altitude operations, unknown and other, and it still wouldn't equal loss of control in flight. Okay, so if we can, let's see if we can get to the next slide as well, which takes the fatal loss of control category and it just breaks it out by phase. So Darren, let me know when that's on the screen as well.
Yep, it's up, Rich.
Okay, so again, just kind of breaking out, and we see the familiar, the big 4 again that we saw in a different graphical form a few slides back. We have maneuvering, approach, landing, takeoff, and initial climb. 64% of the fatal loss of controls occur during fatal loss of control accidents occur during these phases of flight. So again, doesn't matter how we want to cut it up, we can see it all comes out the same. We really need to be focusing on these areas. Okay, so I see that back on the screen again. Okay, let's go to the next screen. This comes from AOPA, and this is fatal stall spin accidents by phase of flight. And I've actually decluttered it. It was a pie chart, and I've decluttered it. And again, we see those same big 4: maneuvering, takeoff and initial climb, approach, landing, and MIS is missed approach, which is really go-arounds, which are really takeoffs. So I've included that in here. So 88% of fatal stall spin accidents occur during these phases. So not only are we, if we're going to have some kind of an issue, we're going to lose control during these phases, and then more often than not, the loss of control will end up being some kind of a stall spin departure as well. Again, probably nothing new to the people in this audience. Okay, next slide. So that sort of lays the groundwork of why it's important. And so let's talk about, how can we incorporate UPRT in normal training? Let's go to the next slide, Darren. And so I'm going to call up a couple of advisory circulars that we have here in the States. And this first one is AC 120-109A. It's stall prevention and recovery training. This particular version came out in 2015. And even though it's geared toward air transport category part 121 operations, notice what it says here in this first paragraph underlined. Many of the principles apply to all airplanes. So here's some information that we can take that would dovetail to what they're doing at the air transport level and incorporate it already at the general aviation level, so that by the time the general aviation people who are going from there to the airlines, it's not a totally foreign concept. But we've also integrated some of these ideas during primary training, where we have our law of primacy. Let's go to the next slide as well. And so if we look into this advisory circular, they provide us with a stall recovery template. And what I've done here is the template is as broad as it can be. It includes the most sophisticated air transport category aircraft that's out there. But we can take that template and we can bring it down by taking out the things that don't apply to us, boil it down to things that we can certainly apply in general aviation. And as we do that, what we find is that there's really nothing new under the sun here, right? So we're flying a Cessna 152 as an example. No autopilot, no auto throttle, so we'll cross that off. Let's take out the speed brakes and the spoilers. Maybe the airplane has an engine failure at the same time. Who knows? So we take the thrust out of the equation. It's just about pushing and rolling, isn't it? Push to lower the angle of attack. That's the primary thing we need to do. And then let's address the angle of bank. And one of the things that's not stated, but that's implicit here in the template, is that we're always going to be working the rudder. It's not just sitting there doing nothing. We're always working the rudder as needed throughout to maintain, in this particular case, coordinated flight. So we can take the broad AC 120-109 stall and stick push training template, stall recovery template, bring it down and use the same kind of terminology, even in a glider for that matter, or a Cessna 152 at the general aviation level, and then start layering up as the pilot goes from a glider to a Cessna 152 to a TBM 850, something, or a Meridian type aircraft, and then they move into the small jets, the biz jets, and then the air transport level. So we just start uncovering other aspects here, just filling in some of the blanks. But you can see that we can be on a consistent page with what's going to happen at the air transport level. Okay, so let's go to the next slide, if we would. Again, these are just advisory, but it's out there. It's available to all of us. It would be nice if we, at least in the States here, paid a little bit more attention to this. Sometimes pretty good information from the FAA. So this is AC 120-111, upset prevention and recovery training. So here's a nice little document from the FAA. This is also in 2015. Notice what I've underlined here. Again, it's really geared toward the air transport airline environment. The FAA encourages all airplane operators, pilot schools, and training centers to implement UPRT and to use this guidance. Well, there it is, right? I mean, we don't have to be mandated, do we? We're encouraged. So let's go ahead and incorporate some of this in. So next slide, if we would. And so the next slide that comes up will be side by side. It's two templates that are provided in AC 120-111, upset prevention and recovery training. And these are for nose high and nose low recoveries. And just at a first glance, we're not going to spend a lot of time on this, but at a first glance, you can see there are a lot of commonalities between the two. And just like I did with the stall awareness, the stall recovery template, kind of showed you how we could weed it down and make it apply in the general aviation context, even the sailplane context. As a challenge to you, I'm going to ask you to consolidate these two, which apparently they appear separately in the advisory circular. You can make this one procedure that will handle nose high or nose low. How would you do that? And then how would you reduce it down to the general aviation environment? So that's a challenge I'm going to leave for you, whether it's something you do as a group or maybe come back together later on. I know how I reduce it. Maybe we can have some kind of a discussion at some other point via Zoom or something and kind of go over that. But you can see there's pretty good information that's out there already, and nobody's telling us we can't do this at the general aviation level. It's just whether or not more and more people would be willing to do it. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so again, very good information out there. Many of you, I know Paul has seen this as well. ICAO put out in 2014 a manual on airplane upset prevention and recovery training, and it talks about the equipment, it talks about instructor qualifications, it talks about what is the best optimal learning experience, which involves academic training, it involves simulation, it involves what they call on airplane or in airplane training as well. The middle one is a paper that I co-authored with Randy Brooks and Paul Ransbury from Aviation Performance Solutions in Arizona that we actually submitted to ICAO as they were getting ready to publish this document, their manual, that really tried to address some of the considerations that went into the effective delivery of UPRT. And I know Paul has this as well, and maybe he can disseminate that to others there who don't have it. And the current FAA Airplane Flying Handbook, this is the 2001 version, has a chapter on upset prevention and recovery training. So again, even though it's not mandatory here, there's lots of encouragement, there's lots of information that is available, and we are encouraged to incorporate this in. Now, whether or not flight instructors are willing and able to do that, that'll be kind of the next question that we'll address in a moment. But the chapter that's in the Airplane Flying Handbook, we also had a hand in at least drafting some of it, and some of what we had to say actually appeared in there. So good for FA on that. Darren, let's go to the next one. So one of the things that comes out that's in that FAA handbook is a table. And one of the things we need to do as a UPRT focus is to really keep hammering home that UPRT is not aerobatic training. Even though we might be using the same equipment, even though many of us wear those two hats, we sometimes are aerobatic instructors, aerobatic competitors, but we are also UPRT instructors, and they are totally different things, or at least in terms of our approach. I don't agree with all of the things that are on here, but at least the primary objectives in aerobatic training, we're teaching pilots how to do the maneuvers correctly. In a UPRT, we are intentionally screwing maneuvers up and having other people learn how to fix it. So that's really the key difference between the two. Also, the training resources in UPRT, it has to have academics. It does. It might want to include simulation training, which is what they're doing at the airline level, of course. They haven't quite got to the on-airplane part of it yet, but that's where we come in because that's something that we do on a regular basis. Okay, let's go to the next one. Okay, and so what we have here, again, we can put out whatever we want, and all the better if we have some industry support behind it. David Pilkington has this available on his website, but working with industry, including the FAA, the FAA's safety team program is also embraced this as well. Through some sponsorship with Avemco Insurance here in Hartzell Propellers, I put together and published the Learn to Turn program. So you can't get any more basic than trying to teach pilots how to turn an airplane, which happens to be, maneuvering flight, which is one of the top causes or phases of flight where pilots are losing control. And who would have thought, David can probably roll his eyes about it, but who would have thought somebody could have written 25,000 words on how to turn an airplane? Well, I did. And so we can put out resources that have been vetted and have support that's on a voluntary basis. And we have several flight schools and operations and places like AOPA and EAA and Society of Aviation and Flight Educators here all of whom are making this material available to their members. And that's totally grassroots. Grassroots is what you're doing there with this conference today. And we can approach it from an organic, a bottom-up sort of thing. The other thing too is that we want to not just limit ourselves, even though most of us in the room here fly aerobatic airplanes and we deliver UPRT in airplanes capable of spinning and capable of exploring the entire flight envelope. But we need to take opportunities to deliver UPRT, which I call emergency maneuver training since 1987. Even if it's a non-aerobatic airplane, there are a lot of things, a lot of concepts, a lot of training exercises and techniques that can be used in a non-aerobatic airplane, even within normal category maneuver limits and design limits. And so we shouldn't necessarily limit ourselves that, oh, it's either got to be all or nothing. We got to take it where we can get it, right? And so part of that is we can train the trainers who can then deliver UPRT in non-aerobatic airplanes, which then opens the door for the next step, which is to come to specialists like all of us in the room. I'm there virtually, of course, to go that next level and really explore 360 degrees of the potential envelope out there. So over the years, I put together a module consisting of 4 lessons that is designed for use in normal category airplanes. And I'm sure you've all seen kind of eye-opening things with the pilots you're training and even maybe the instructor. Something as simple as doing a stall and a slip. I would wager in the States, 8 out of 10 flight instructors have never done a stall and a slip, but they'll tell you how the airplane will behave in a stall and a slip because somebody else who hasn't done one either has told them how an airplane will behave in a stall and a slip. So we can do a lot just to expand people's experience in envelopes without necessarily going upside down, even though that would be the ultimate experience, UPRT experience. Let's go to the next slide if we can. The other thing with UPRT, one of the hierarchies, the mitigation and avoidance and mitigation strategies is it's called awareness, prevention, and recovery. And so obviously the earlier in the chain we can recognize and break what's going on, the more effective things are, the more options we have, frankly. And so I've basically put the big 3 here. The stall, the spin, and the spiral, right? The 3 S's in aviation. And on the awareness side, we have an action and a consequence. Things don't happen to the pilot. They happen because of the pilot. The pilot did something. One of the things we want to try to get away from is having conversations that start with the airplane stalled or the airplane spun. No, the pilot stalled the airplane. The pilot spun the airplane, right? We are part of the process. It's not an adversarial thing. We did something. Maybe it's not what we intended, but we inadvertently did something, and the airplane can only do what we tell it to do. So we have, if you pull long enough, far enough in the upright environment, we're going to stall the airplane. We have the prevention side of it. So what do we want to do if we recognize that? Relax, stop pulling, make effective use of the trim, right? So that we let the airplane do the work. And then ultimately, if we stall the airplane, what's the main action? Push, right? We can tie that directly back to that stall recovery template that's in the FAA advisory circular. And the other thing we can see here is notice the common thread, right? On what gets people into trouble. Stall, spin, or spiral. One of the big things is they've been pulling too much, too long at the wrong time, right? And notice what the prevention is. If you don't know what to do, stop doing it. Relax, right? Let the plane do the work for you. If we think we're increasing angle of attack, relax, trim the airplane. If we think we're getting out of whack, getting high angle of attack, and can't feel if I'm coordinated or not, relax the controls, get yourself coordinated. If it's the spiral, relax, which is, military calls it unload. Just relax, shallow tank, right? So then we have the recovery actions: push, power, aileron, rudder, elevator for spin recovery, power, push, roll would be our roll recovery. So let's go to the next slide. So making UPRT mandatory. So already we've seen that there's lots of information out there that is not mandatory for us at the GA level, but lots of encouragement, lots of resources we can tap into, lots of ways that we can try to get other operators, even at the who aren't delivering UPRT, to at least start thinking in terms of the language and the techniques and the purpose, really, priming the pump, if you will, for pilots to eventually take some UPRT with us, or if they get to the airlines before that happens, that's where they're going to get it. So let's go to the next slide, if you would. So let's talk about mandating UPRT. And I think we would all agree that stall and spin awareness falls under that umbrella. It's high angle of attack, which is one of the two prongs of UPRT, the other being overbanked attitudes. This is Advisory Circular 6167C, Charlie, change 2. This came out in 2016, but what I'm going to read here has been mandated in the States since 1991. So we can do the math. What is that? 31 years now, right? So this advisory circular explains the stall and spin awareness training required, in other words, mandated under the Code of Federal Regulations. And yet, even though this has been mandatory since 1991, and this is a very good publication, right? Not all FAA publications are good, but this is a good one. I highly recommend it. I used to go around when I was giving seminars, and I would ask people in the group, who has gotten a private, an instrument, a commercial, a CFI since 1991? Hands go up. Then I'll ask, how many of you were given this advisory circular as part of your training? Lots of hands go back down. For a while there, before the year 2000, less than 10% of the pilots in that 9-year period had ever seen this advisory circular, and yet it tells you all the things that are mandatory. So we can mandate stuff, but it doesn't mean that it's going to trickle down necessarily or sufficiently at the flight line. Let's go to the next slide, if we would. And so the bottleneck, we are the bottleneck, flight instructors, right? So there will be a group of instructors who will be reluctant just as a matter of principle, because I've been teaching this way and what I do is just fine. I don't need to change. Well, there'll be a part of that population that is, sad to say, afraid, right? And it's not their fault they're afraid. They've been taught that way, right? And unfortunately, they're teaching other pilots, their trainees, to be afraid as well. So we have a bottleneck. Flight instructors, are they willing and able? Is fear going to prevent them from exposing themselves and their trainees to UPRT? Let's go to the next slide. So what about the brand new flight instructor? I don't know how it is down where you are, but the newly minted flight instructor here has a minimum 250 hours of flight time and is provided 0 hours of instruction. And chances are they've been taught, at least at some of the large flight schools, the instructors are all homegrown, especially in the Part 141 environment, and they've never had an opportunity, rarely have had an opportunity to do anything outside of the 141 structure. So all they know is what they've been taught, and all they can teach is what they've been taught. And all they're allowed in some cases, sad to say, is to teach exactly what's on the page, and they can't bring anything else in. So can we rely on new flight instructors? Well, that's hard to say as well. So it really is going to require training the trainers in some way. And for us, for every flight instructor we can reach in what we do, that's a multiplier effect, because they can take concepts and some techniques and bring them into the cockpit, introduce them to their students, and then hopefully encourage their students to take the next step and come visit us for full UPRT training. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. Here in the States, of course, for quite a while, flight instructor applicants have been required to have a CFI spin endorsement. The current one says the endorsement attests that that applicant is competent and possesses instructional proficiency in stall awareness, spin entry, spins, and spin recovery procedures. In other words, they're capable of teaching what we do. And I'm sure if I could see the heads nodding, you know that's not true. Not true here at all. I don't know how it is there. but on average, the typical flight instructor applicant here receives on the order of 0 additional ground instruction in stall spin dynamics, and typically will have experience either doing spins or having spins done to them. In an airplane like a Cessna 172, maybe if they're lucky one turn, maybe if their instructor is not too terrified, maybe 3 or 4 or 5 spin entry and recovers, and they're signed off as competent to teach. Are any of us competent to do anything as complex as spin training after 3 or 4 exposures to it of less than one turn in a docile airplane like a 172? If we were, we would have all been instructing as student pilots. We would have been teaching other pilots how to land after our 3rd or 4th landing. That's ridiculous, right? And unfortunately, next slide, please. The CFI spin endorsement in the United States amounts to nothing more than a participation trophy. And, you know, it pains me to say that because it doesn't have to be that way. We can do better. We know how to do better. And again, you need to bring the knowledge and the experience and all of that, mandatory or not, right? Because even if it's the spin endorsement's mandatory, but it's so open-ended that there are really no checks and balances on what is being delivered and what's being learned, if anything at all. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So the ICAO manual really talks about the 3 prongs that are necessary. There's a saying here in the States, I don't know if it applies if you have something similar, but the cockpit of an airplane is a lousy classroom, right? The days of just chucking people into the cockpit and thinking that they're going to learn all the nuances, that's just not realistic. And so really the framework is one of academics. It's one of simulation. And when I say simulation, probably all of us right away think of a full motion simulator at the, an airline, at an airline facility, or it could be something like a Redbird. And those are great. It could be a desktop PC. But simulation could also be as simple but as effective as mental imagery and visualization. We see competition pilots and airshow pilots doing exactly that before they go fly their routines, right? So it can be effective if we bring all of the elements in. And then, of course, what cements the whole process is having the experience in the airplane, in real time, under the real stress of, hey, I'm 4,000 feet above the ground and the ground's going around really, really fast. And this is a continual circle. It's a continual cycle, right? It's lifelong learning. It's recurrent training. It's a commitment to perfecting our craft. And so under academics, we're trying to equip pilots with knowledge and awareness. In the simulation, we're trying to build on that knowledge and experience in a safe environment, right? We can make mistakes if we're hangar flying, if we're visualizing, as long as we can correct them in the visualization. We can make mistakes in the sim and then hit reset and try to fix it. And then we can get into the airplane where we develop the knowledge, the awareness, and the hands-on experience with it. Let's go to the next slide. So one of the recommendations, I'm not just going to leave it out there that things are hopeless, because obviously they're not. A lot of us have been doing this for a long time. Progress might be slow, but it's slow but steady, maybe more slow than steady. So my recommendation, keep doing what we do, right? And do it the right way. And I'm sure all of you do that there. Get together. I think what you're doing here is fantastic. I would like to beg, borrow, and steal the whole idea that you're doing there and do something similar here. Be proactive, right? When you see bad information being put out there, correct it. If you see somebody having difficulty with something, offer to help them. Offer to talk to flight instructors and get them on a better path using better language or consistent language when they talk about roll, yaw, and pitch, and what does that really look like? What is the airplane really doing, right? And again, back to something I've said a few times already, train the trainers. If we can reach the flight instructors, we have a multiplier effect, and then, maybe we have potential additional customers who want to go beyond what their flight instructor and flight school can provide for them. Let's go to the next slide. So we have a little bit of time, and I'm sorry Patty couldn't be here, so that's why you have to listen to me longer. I know I was showing up to see Patty again, but that's just the way it goes. She's probably on her way home from the air venture. But if he has any questions, I know we're kind of going through this quickly. There's going to be a lot of stuff thrown at you throughout the day. This PDF is available to all of you. Some of the other material that I referenced, I know Paul has, if he's not sent it out to you already. Please have all of that material and see if there are ways that, maybe you're doing a lot of that stuff already, maybe small tweaks to kind of normalize what you're saying and doing to be more consistent with the recommendations. I think the fact that you're all there lets me know that you are learners. You're not just teachers. So we're open to new learning experiences, which is great to see. So I'm going to open up to questions. Darren, maybe if you could repeat the question to me, because I do have some echoing there as well, or Paul or anybody else. Happy to address some questions. And then Paul, you can kick me off whenever you say so.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Rich. Do we have any questions from the floor at all? Neil?
Firstly, thanks, Rich. Neil Schaefer from Recreational Aviation Australia. One of the things I'd like to ask you, Rich, is how much do you think the current training system of demonstration rather than scenario-based sourcing situations is actually causing part of the problem in relation to upset conditions?
Yeah, I think I got most of that. Darren, could you just paraphrase that for me?
So I might get you to. I think it's because we've got two microphones on.
Okay, off you go. Neil, you want to get over there? I can stand next to Darren and ask for his microphone.
Sorry to make you do all that, but
You're right, Rich. Neil Schaefer again. I just wanted to get your thoughts on how much do you think the current demonstration method and the artificiality of that, in particularly installing, is actually contributing to the poor understanding of the stall spin situation, and whether or not scenario-based training, where it actually happens, can be embedded better into the syllabus.
Yeah, so that's a great question, and I do think that the current method, the first thing we tell our students, of course, is that we can stall in any attitude, at any airspeed, at any power setting, but yet the training environment is set up to do one or two contrived stalls to a check ride standard. So the pilot's practical experience is only doing the check ride stall. And so that intellectual part of it sort of evaporates out of the brain. And so I think there are ways that we can introduce other types of stalls where pilots can see them in different attitudes, even something as simple as a secondary stall from the primary one, where the nose is below the horizon, and giving pilots some of that experience, or an accelerated stall. Or like I said, most instructors have never done a stall in a slip, so they can only tell you what somebody else has told them how the airplane's going to behave. And one of the issues is that, as far as I know, I haven't found any accidents in the States, any stall accidents where the airplane was configured for a check ride stall. It's always been doing something else, right? That base to final turn, or some kind of a botched turn, or the climbing turn out, right? So we're doing other things. And so one of the things that's in the advisory circular is to introduce the realistic distractions. Well, how are we doing that? I do something very simple with pilots, with my trainees, that seems simple, but it's the first time they've ever done it. You just take the normal wings level approach to landing stall, make it as simple as possible. Keep the flaps up, clean configuration. Power comes back, the wings are level, right? You know how to do it looking over the nose. So I'll have them do the entire stall entry, the stall break, and the stall recovery, looking only at the left wing. Feel your way in and out of it. Then I'll have them count the cars on the road. And if it's a 4-place airplane, I'll have them look in the right rear seat, do the stall entry recovery and the whole thing, just looking back there. So just changing the field of view. And in the end, you can ask the trainee, when it stalls, does it matter where you're looking? Answer is no. What do you do when it stalls? Push forward. Can you do that if I put a blindfold on you? Yes. So how simple can that be? But it takes them away from that fixation straight ahead and sort of starts opening up their other senses to being able to tell when the airplane's going to stall. So yeah, I agree. We can do more, and it's not like anything that we have to add to the syllabus adds more time. It's just paying more attention to the details and breaking things up and bringing in additional ways of accomplishing the same thing. It doesn't add another 10 or 15 or 20 hours to the current syllabus. It's just doing better at delivering the current syllabus. And that starts with doing what's in the advisory circular here on stall and spin awareness training, which has been mandated since 1991. Kind of a long answer, sorry. Any other questions? I see somebody has their hand raised online here. Let me see if I can get that on here.
Yeah, g'day. Can you hear me there? Joel Haskey from the Aerobatic School in Sydney. So I run a school. We integrate all of this stuff into our basic training, and we do high-speed stalling, angle of attack recovery, all of that as part of the training, as well as some basic aerobatics. And our customers come to us pre-qualified. Effectively, they want that kind of training as part of their basic training. So they end up at a very high standard at the end because they're getting all of that confidence building and training throughout their flying. I've also worked quite a bit with some other flying schools doing their instructor spin qualification for their instructor ratings, right?
Mm-hmm.
Every time I work with another school, the anxiety level that I see from the instructor when they have to do spinning with us, and we use the Robin 2160 or Alpha 160, whatever you want to call it, and we do fully developed stable 10-turn spins with recovery. And I can't tell you how many times I've had to bring an instructor back who, one, is like so anxious to the point of almost not being able to operate the aeroplane, and two, they get motion sick as well as a result of the anxiety. And my experience has been that a lot of instructors fear the motion sickness a lot more necessarily than the actual spinning, but they've also got this huge kind of block about, spinning an aeroplane. And I'm just wondering if you've got any thoughts, or if anyone here has any thoughts on how we can kind of try and break down this stigma and anxiety amongst the instructing community about stalling and spinning, because it's not, I mean, it's, even wing dropping, doing, proper wing drops in aircraft are a huge source of anxiety for a lot of instructors, because they just,
Sure. Yeah. And what you're saying is something that I've seen as well. And I think there are several things going on here. First of all, the instructor is the product of another instructor, right? We are all products of our training. And so it's not necessarily their fault, is it? I mean, it's the training system has grown these instructors. And then you put them in airplanes with other students, and maybe they already have a certain level of anxiety or apprehension, and maybe it's a low level. But then, by the time they're working with their 10th student, they've been terrified by things that have been happening with these students, that it just kind of keeps wearing, and they become overly sensitized to those sorts of things. A similar thing I had here about a year ago. I had an instructor contact me, and he'd say, "Hey, look, I realize that I'm passing my fear and anxiety on to my students, and I need to fix that." I mean, he was fairly young enough in the instruction process. And we went out and we did a bunch of different things to get him over that hump. And so obviously the longer that festers with the instructor, the more difficult it's going to be. It goes back to that law of primacy thing. Plus they become hypersensitized to it. And so, and maybe part of that is ego driven too. Hey, I'm a flight instructor. I'm supposed to be able to handle all of this. I mean, that's the outward projection, but inwardly it's, yeah, I don't really know that I can deal with that. I'll give you one of the most extreme cases. When I was first teaching back, it was probably 1980, late 87, 1988. I had an airline pilot come to me who had just retired. He'd spent, he did his 40 years, and he wanted to, he hadn't flown a light airplane that entire time. Now he was retired. He wanted to get back to flying light airplanes and enjoying flying the way he thought it was supposed to be. And we went up and we were barely out of the traffic pattern. We had our discussion. We did all of that. We were barely out of the traffic pattern heading toward the practice area. And I was having him just do some gentle wing rocks, Dutch roll, coordination exercise, whatever you want to call it, aileron and rudder working together, no more than 30 degrees of bank. And after the third one, he said, we have to stop. We had to go back. We had to land. And the fact of the matter was he had flown passengers in jet aircraft terrified for 40 years. And those are psychological problems that I certainly can't fix. And he felt so strongly about what he wanted to try to do that he actually left the money on the account for the entire course for us to use as a scholarship for somebody who could benefit from it. So, I mean, that's a really sad but scary but sad case, right? And so the sooner we can get information out there and break that cycle of anxiety and fear, I think the more effective what we do will be. And of course, in a case like that, obviously you can't just strap them in the plane and go out and do a 10 turner, right? You got to maybe treat the flight instructors who have that anxiousness with a little bit more kid gloves than we might have to deal with somebody else. Because in the end, we want them to go away with a positive experience. We want them to feel more comfortable so that they stay in the system and do a better job instructing their students as well. So I don't know if we have time for other questions. I know Joel Haskey, as a guest, has his hand raised. Was that you, Joel, who just asked the question?
Richard. Yeah, that was me.
Okay, very good. So Paul, you let us know if we have time for any other questions or comments. Otherwise, like I said, it's over to you as soon as you're tired of me.
Rich, you can hear me okay?
Yeah, maybe a little closer.
Okay, I just want to thank you for your time and input. There's a couple of things I wrote down here I just wanted to talk about. You talked about we could put training on normal category aeroplanes. Neil and I had a discussion last week about how we're experimenting with our effects of control students with that first lesson and experimenting how we can get them to understand that straight level attitude with the wings level at cruise power setting is their safe place. And when we demonstrate second effective yaw, we get them to actually roll the wings level and nose down and bring the aeroplane up to the level attitude with a greater than cruise speed and get them to hold the attitude until it returns back to that safe place. So that's lesson one. And it was really funny because Neil and I was talking about it, he said, I did the same thing yesterday. And it's just really refreshing to know that we're all on the same page. So like I said, we don't need to
yeah, let me just interject on that, Paul, before you move on. Yeah, the interesting thing is, right, if we hang around in aviation long enough and we experiment and we're open to trying to figure out new things, a lot of us sort of reach the same place. And the unfortunate part of that is all of our little pockets of what many of us are doing is time spent reinventing the same wheel, right? What can we do to consolidate that so that people don't have to keep reinventing the wheel. There's so much institutional knowledge out there that's not captured at all. So, that's a much bigger issue anyway. But you're right. I've ended up. I've talked to David Pilkington several times and read his book, and I go, gee, he must have been looking over my shoulder, because we're simpatico on so many different things, and I'm sure that's the case as many of you talk in that room there today. Sorry to cut you off there, Paul, but go ahead. I just wanted to throw that in there.
And that's why we're here. It's exactly why we're here. It's the pool of resources. And on that point, Darren and I have actually created a resource bucket. So if people have stuff that they want to put in and share, we can make that publicly available. And that'll be like things like your brief, Rich, and if people are happy for their briefs to go public, that would be good too. Talk something about aviation talk, Rich, and talking the language. Everybody knows you're going to be a pilot, you've got to say Roger, Roger, give me a Victor, Victor, all of that sort of crap, right? We need to get people to start talking about stick position and unloading the aeroplane and angle of attack. These are the new words that we need to teach people when they're coming through. It's not just about, I'm wearing bars and I was inverted and all that sort of stuff. It's about getting this as normal language so that people, much to my wife's dismay, my wife is a wonderful flight instructor, but I have some really out there ideas, and I have a bird cage with a plastic ball in it, because my wife came up with the adage of keep the ball in the cage. Just keep it in the cage, keep it in the cage. So we took this bird cage to the air show with a plastic ball in it. And people said, what's with the ball? We're going to keep it in the cage. What do you mean keep it in the cage? Well, keep the ball in the cage. Oh, I get it. It's just something different. I got a little video, just take 2 minutes, 2 minutes 30, I think it is. And it's on what we were talking about, how people are products of the way that they're taught. Now, I did some spin endorsements for instructor training, and for your benefit, Rich, here in Australia, you just have to have a spin endorsement to be a flight instructor. You don't actually have to teach spinning, you just have to have a spin endorsement. And I got a spin endorsement with these guys and girls from a training organisation, and they were products of rote learning. And so here's a little video about, I asked this guy, hey, we're out there to do a spin endorsement, so just as a warm-up, run me through your wings level, 1G, idle, stall, and stall recovery pattern. And this is what happened.
Maybe just mute that mic thing. So there we go.